So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. Me, Tim Carney, James Carney, Jeff Doty. We are here. We are streaming, and we're going to do a live Q&A today. We're going to answer these questions, I believe, in the order that they were received. So if you have questions now, James is going to make note of those questions and put them into a doc, and we will try to get to those as well. And we'll probably stream for about an hour, hour and a half. How are you guys doing today? Everyone doing good?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well.
What you're looking at says, Sup, home skillets. So we'll dive in here. There were a lot of great questions. The first one that we'll go into is from Jonathan Bell. What is the most difficult aspect of RPG content creation for you? Whether it be a topic, a process, etc. Jeff, what is this for you? What's the most difficult aspect?
For me, it's oh God, I hate saying it because of the way that it makes me feel, but it's true. It's just like the tedium parts of it. Whatever the annoying things are to do with it are always the stumbling blocks, like motivation, to just do like the small details that you just have to power through. Like I can do big concept brainstorming and big picture ideas just forever. But like the small little details of like, oh, I have to work on, I can come up with an idea for a D100 table, and be super happy with what that would look like. But then having to actually go through and just type all those things, just like those small little bits of tedium and like mundanity that like you have to do to make the finished product good, but aren't part of like the sort of grand pie in the sky creativity, in that sort of super, super broad way, is always the part that really gets me. I love to come up with ideas. I love to like talk about those things and sort of flesh out plans and the big picture elements. But then, comes a time where you just have to do the legwork. And it's just like, that can be really tough for me to like motivate myself to do that part.
Yeah. I know that for me, it's finding, so it's funny because I'm actually the opposite. To a degree, I get into this sort of monomaniacal state where I'm like, villain schemes. And then I'm like, and I can just, but I have to tell you, the number one thing for me is finding time that's uninterrupted. The biggest enemy, the biggest difficulty for me is even now, right now, I have this idea and I want to write it out. I know what I want it to say. I have the rough wording. I even have a couple notes in my phone, but then sitting in front of the dock and actually having uninterrupted time where my wife doesn't need me and that my daughter doesn't want to show me something or etc. Can be very challenging. That's why what I've done is to overcome that challenge, I try to work very early in the morning. Like I've started getting up at like 5, and then I work very late at night. It makes for less sleep, but 2 uninterrupted hours equivocates to like 4 or 5 with a bunch of stop-start. So that's me. Time. Uninterrupted time. So yeah, that's probably the most challenging thing for me.
For me, I have a very difficult time getting, like I get an idea and I'm very motivated and I know how I want it to make people feel. And then sitting down to write that. And then when you're done, I can never tell, and I don't know that there's an easy way to do this, whether or not what I have done will evoke that. And that concerns me because you can run it. And then at the end, you're either going to go, that was perfect, or you're going to go, man, I was way off. I'm not sad I wasted my time, but like I wish there was an easier way to run content through the gauntlet, specifically like if I'm running a game, less for publishing, sort of run that content through a gauntlet to go, oh, and I made my players feel what I wanted them to feel. As a GM, sometimes it's disheartening to, write something and to run for people, and then it kind of goes in a totally different direction, or the tone is not what you expected, or something like that. And I have a really hard time between what's called implementation and exact execution, deciding the implementation, then actually executing.
Yeah. And I think that's very real to many. And that when you figure out how to bridge that gap, then I want to know how you do it. Because I feel like what players feel and what I feel, it almost never fails that a player will say, I loved that game. And it is always the session where I'm like, I think I did terribly as a game master. And they're like, that was the best one yet. And I'm like, I don't even know. So, Dwayne Wild asks, as a player, I want to take better notes, but I keep failing. So I'll end up with disorganized pages of names, places, items, tasks, objects, and then it becomes this massive pile of useless info. I think we've all been there. How do you take notes as a player? And then what format do you use? And how do you keep all the pieces organized into something that's useful in a game that can last months or years? I'll take this one to start. For me, I had to switch to online. I have Docs, Google Docs, because they're Control F searchable, and I just label them. So it'll be like plot point, : and that way I can have this scattered bit, but I can take and then copy and paste, and that's exactly what I do. So for me, I am like you. A notepad, like a physical notepad of mine, is notes up the side, a doodle over here, an arrow, almost unusable after like the end of the session. So that's how I do it. And that can become challenging if you play an in-person game. If the game master will allow it, having a laptop open with Google Docs, I would totally allow that, especially if you're going to type up like plot points that you're potentially share with the players. So that's honestly how I do it. And then how do I keep it organized into pieces, for games that are months and years? I don't personally have the time to make a wiki or do the things like make a world anvil or whatever. So just a good old-fashioned Google Doc. And then I label each thing, object, item, question, like whatever. And then I pile them into specific sections. I put the date, and there you go. It works really well for me.
I'm so glad you had a good answer to this question. I'm so bad. I don't take notes as a player, and I rarely take notes as a GM. I don't know what it is. I just can't. It's just I've never taken notes literally for anything in my life. Like something about it just doesn't work with the way that my brain works. So my secret hack that is extremely personal to me, that's difficult to steal, is that the other people that I play with take extremely detailed notes, and I steal theirs. And honestly, that's all I got. So I'm very glad that Tim had a very elaborate, detailed breakdown, because I don't take notes, and I know that I probably should. And I don't. It's just my brain doesn't work in that way, and sometimes it leads to me forgetting things, and that can suck. And I'll cop to that when it happens. But honestly, like for the most part, people I just find usually don't care that much if you just like ask, just like, hey, sorry, what was the name of that guy that we talked to? Oh yeah, it was that. Okay, cool. I'll go to that guy and then I'll do this and this and this, and I don't think it's a big deal to like, if nobody can remember and it was important, then that's pretty bad. But I think for the most part, like someone's gonna know it. And honestly, there's plenty of times where it just doesn't matter that much, I think, where it's just like, wait, wasn't that guy's name something different? Oh, yeah, I think it was. Oh, okay. Like the game just goes on anyways. So like that's, I guess, to wrangle this into some small sense of a tip, in whatever way I can try to. It's not a big deal if things slip through the cracks, for the most part. Like it's, these details are pretty easily replaceable, and someone's probably going to have it covered. So whatever system works best for you is probably going to be good enough. And unless it's like super your thing, it doesn't have to be perfectly detailed.
And I think building on what both of them what they both said, let's get some grammar here. I think it's important to separate why you're taking notes. And so it sounds, based on the question, Dwayne, like you might want to remember this later. The way Tim and Jeff talked about it, it seemed more in the style of to make sure you don't forget an important NPC, which I think is good. But I'm in that case in the camp with Jeff where I'm like, well, I don't have to remember his name because someone will know, like I'm in the moment kind of playing. But to give a better concept of how I take notes, if I want to have a much better, I guess, list of all the things that happen, say, for me, the important second step that most people lose, based on your question, you said you take a lot of notes and then when you come back to them later, they're just a mess and you don't know what they mean. It's important to, quote unquote, convert them to long-term memory. So you take you take your random crazy notes, and then the only way to do this is right after the session ends, you have to flesh them out. You have to go, oh, okay, Benjavir. Oh, well, that was the elf that did the thing. Oh, that object, that random thing I put. Oh, this is just my HP I was tracking, so delete that. Those sorts of things where you have to I use the shorthand during the game and then make it long form later. But I don't think you can take long form notes during a game and play. So basically that part where if you don't flesh them out, you'll never remember them. So you either have to do that, and if you don't want to do that, consider what things you need to take notes about, or if you can just ask your GM,
Yeah, and I think so, Jeff, I was like you. So to kind of get, touch on like, well, why do I have this elaborate answer? And it's because, I play in a couple of different campaigns where Matt Click is the game master, and Matt is very good, probably the best I've ever seen at keeping a running document of what happens. And it's like he has that doc. So when he's bringing that A game and there's these nuances that you see like in great TV shows, and I'm missing them because I'm just like, I decided, I was like, well, no, I'm gonna match his level of commitment and bring my A game because it's gonna be better for me. And so then I started so it's really because of like the provokers and things like that where I had to start making notes. And James, you're right, long form never gonna happen, but I'll put name, colon, try to spell it as best I can. And then I'll put like, orc who stole thing, because that's all I need. And then when I go back the next session, I think it's way cool. And I think it feels really good for the game master too. If I go, imagine we haven't played in a month and I'm like, hey, I want to talk about, Charlagash, the orc commander, and that object that she stole. Can I ask somebody in the town? And they're like, you're paying attention? So that's kind of my jam. So hopefully that helps, Dwayne. And I think that'll at least get you started. But find a way that works with your game master as well. Some game masters might not allow like a phone or a laptop.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever let someone have a laptop, whether they said they were taking notes or not. I'd be like, nope, you can pen and paper it, or I'll give you notes after, but not going to happen.
There you go. See? So it's not going to work. So Dwayne, sorry, we have to kick you.
Suddenly we're watching, YouTube videos from the late 90s. And I'm like, no.
This is from Nicholas Jacquet. I've never pronounced that, so tell me if I'm wrong. Jacket. When dealing with vastly different players inside a game, how do you balance the flow of the game so that everyone is happy? I'm going to throw this one directly at Jeff Doty.
So my solution for these sorts of things, it's the same one that I say every time. Just talk as players, not as characters, about this sort of thing of just like, okay, look, you've got a lot of people who want a lot of different things from the game. So we're going to need some compromise here. We can't have everybody do what they want, exactly what they want all the time, because people want too many different things and we can't quite get like that perfectly coherent game start to finish that'll catch everybody's wants. So, we'll need to be open about how we solve this. So you want, you really enjoy that sort of super chaotic, disruptive style, and that's okay, that's fun. And you really like some serious role play, and you really like some combat. So, we're gonna have to take turns. We can't do all that all the time because the disruptive and the role play, can kind of fight each other. So, one session, we might let you really take your approach and be super crazy and disruptive and do what you want there and find a way for that to be productive to the game. And then maybe the next scene, that's going to be a role play scene. And if you don't want to be super serious and into it, you don't have to involve yourself at all, but I'll have this moment for him. And just kind of be open and honest about the need for the compromises and the different needs, and have those things all be publicly stated and acknowledged, and build the expectations. And then you can just go from there. Like, you have, like, as long as everybody knows what everybody else wants, and that sometimes they'll have to give up certain moments for other people to have theirs, and that people are all willing to do that, then I think you're golden with that. Just be open, be honest, actually have the conversation. Don't just expect it to magically work out. Like, you have to talk about it and set it up explicitly, or else, I've said this many times across many different things, and I'll say it again. If you don't set up the expectation, you have no right to expect people to adhere to it. So if you want things to go a certain way, then you have to say that out loud to the other people. And if everybody does that, then you can figure some way to make it all work.
Yeah, and when you're picking a restaurant, most people have a group of friends or family members they hang out with, and when you're choosing where to eat, mom always likes to go to that particular place, but I don't really like it, but it's kind of her turn. In the same way, it's also cool to rotate and be very explicit about it. So, like what you're saying, Jeff, to set that expectation, here's a very practical example of doing it. Hey, everyone, this session is going to be real role play heavy. This particular one, because we're at a place in the campaign where a lot of these plots are coming together. But I do have a pretty big set piece combat coming up shortly after that, maybe in a session or two. And so just buckle up, because we will be doing that as well. It's the same as going, yeah, we can absolutely eat Tijuana Flats this week, but I really, really want to get Indian. So in 2 weeks, that's when we're doing that. And people are like, cool, hey, that's the plan. And when you set it out like that very clearly, a lot of times I'm like, yeah, I can muscle through some role play. Little bonus tip, there's also nothing wrong. People generally don't just have one thing they love. So even the disruptive, crazy combat player, you can give them a side thing to be doing, and it's like a kitten with a ball of yarn. They can actually be doing a thing in the same place, but give them a task. Like, hey, listen, there's this person over here who's having a huge problem lifting this thing, or they need you to consistently do this task, or they'll be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go help. And now they're doing their thing while everyone else is role-playing. And you can just cut the camera over to them every once in a while and make them feel like they're a part. Similarly to how in movies, where they'll cut from characters to characters, and that can provide comedic relief or get a sense that everyone's in the scene. So,
yeah, I haven't much had players so focused on quote-unquote their thing, the thing they might be expecting, that they couldn't wait a little bit, or like you said, muscle through some role play. I think the way I consider it is, depending on how you brought this group together, and if you had a session 0, the idea is there's something they can likely all agree on. There's a reason they're here. And it's important to note that just the type of gameplay isn't the only way, where as long as you're focusing on the thing that we're all interested in, then you can get really far. In the sense that if you start to feel players pulling away, maybe you're not... There's something you can do. I guess I wouldn't blame the GM, but you can definitely go, okay, well, let me rein it back in and remind everybody why we showed up. And then also we're going to get to the combat later for you and the exploration later for you. And, so mixing it as well into, well, why did they show up, and focus on that. There's something they can probably agree on, and try to push that a little more as well in those times where there's not one specific style.
He had a second question that I'll hit on with, I think, something that'll be helpful, and I'm going to adopt this moving into 2020 because I've seen it successfully work. With so much content going around, how do you stay focused on the campaign you're running? And so I assume what you mean is, hey, I'm inspired by The Witcher. Hey, I'm inspired by The Mandalorian. Hey, I'm inspired by whatever new thing is cool to me. How do you get inspired by what's around without losing focus on what you're already doing? I've seen Matt Click do this. Marquise Hardis has done this a lot. I would consider running trilogies. So run shorter campaigns. The cool thing about that is it can be like a small season of a TV show. So you don't have to say, Okay, new characters, new session. You can have the same characters episodically, almost like an anthology, playing out the same stories 3 sessions at a time. And then you can absolutely say, hey, and this time we're going to use these same cool characters you used to and love, but it's going to be more of a Mandalorian deal where they stumble into a town with bounty hunters. Oh, monster hunting. Oh, that way, and I would say plan for 1 session, because I've never seen a trilogy or I've never seen a 1-shot that didn't turn into a 2-shot or a trilogy in the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. Not never. Close to never. So maybe plan a 1-shot, let it bleed into a 3-session trilogy, wrap that up, and be done with it.
I think another thing that's very important is if you can do your best to identify what it is about the new thing that's getting you excited that excites you, you can meld things across genres in a way that you may not expect. So Tim, for your story, if I'm running a fantasy game and I'm pulling a lot of stuff from Witcher, but I see a cool episode of Mandalorian, or I, saw something cool in a movie I see, or something that's maybe sci-fi or very different, I go, okay, well, I can take that general idea and fit it into what I'm doing now. I still get the excitement of putting it in to, like you said, bounty hunters, where that concept, the other important thing is you can run other games, so yeah. Very few people I know have a campaign and they go, oh, sorry, I can't play any more 1-shots because I've got my campaign next week. And it's like, nah, I'm free Wednesday. I also have my campaign next week. I've been watching Mandalorian. Let's do something cool with bounty hunters, but in general, I think you will get very excited about stuff, and it's okay to not rein yourself in as long as you don't always jump to the new thing, I guess. Try to incorporate it in what you're doing instead of starting a new thing to do it.
Yeah, and it's just important to kind of take stock of, like, am I interested in this thing, because it's just interesting in its own right and I want to explore that? Or is it because there's something about my current experience that's failing me? And I think that by doing something different, it might jumpstart into a better situation. So trying to be very self-aware about, like, do I want to change because this isn't working, or just because a new thing is exciting? And it's totally cool for new things to be exciting. And what Tim and James have said of just like, hey, there's nothing wrong with, like, can we take a break, just like 1 session? Let's just do a 1-shot, a Star Wars Mandalorian 1-shot, because I've been super digging that lately. It'd be super fun. Then we can go right back. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Or as James says, there's probably other days that you can play if you want to do that too. It doesn't even have to disrupt the normal campaign. And I agree as well. Take what you like about those things, put them into the thing that you're doing now. Can always be a great way. And yeah, just try to take some time to reflect on the current game experience, and just try to make sure that you're not looking for a reason to jump ship, rather than, and using that excitement as a justification for that, because it could potentially, it's not always, God knows I've had so many times where I'll just, get into a random show, and want to run a 1-shot in that show, and that can be cool. But you also have to be careful just to make sure that you're not trying to, like, bandage up something that you're not happy about by jumping ship. And that's not necessarily always the case. In fact, it's less often the case for me than just being excited about a thing. But it's always good to just be careful of just like, okay, is this game going how I want it to? Am I enjoying it? Is it going in a direction that I feel, at least more or less satisfied with? Do the players like it? If all the answers to that are yes, then just keep playing that game and do other things on the side. And if the answers are no, then maybe you can start to look. Maybe you do just need to say, like, this game just isn't really working out right now. Like, I have all these other ideas for things that I want to do. I can't do them because I'm locked into this and nobody's liking this. Do we want to try to fix it? Do we want to try to stop it? Or do we want to try to just do something else? And the answer to those things are probably all no. You probably want to keep playing, and that's cool. But it's a good reason to look inwards when you have that impulse to, like, not just to try something new, but to radically change things that you're already doing.
And so I want to take a minute to also just basically visit the chat and say thank you for everyone who is watching. What you looking at is here. Christy Ran, Jonathan Bell, Hellmage, Keel Adam. Am I saying that right? Is it Keel or Kyle?
Yeah, it's Keel.
Okay.
Keel.
Keel. That's what I thought. So Keel, and then Ryan Castle or Cassell. Ignite, inspire the story, which is actually Barker. Pretty cool thing. And then Nibs, as well as Alan Waters. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing these incorrectly. If you tell me the correct way to pronounce it, I will remember after a while. I'll try. And then...
So, life hack that I know you know, just do last initial. As well as not putting everybody's last name in the video.
Oh, that's actually a good point. Well, no, their last name is in the video anyway, because it's the chat's recorded.
Yeah, but I just mean it solves both problems of
no,
not,
yeah, that's actually really smart. So Hell
putting
M,
somebody on blast here.
Hell M. Instead of, he also says, I have the large cup, and James classifies it as what I will say is a vase, not a vase. But
vase, no. Vase, but you say vase because you're stupid or being funny.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out, and I'm gonna grab Barker's question. Did you guys already put Barker's question into the doc?
Yeah.
All right. Well played. On to the next question, which is Matthew M. He says, for a more fun question, what's the best story you have to tell from your gaming history? A cool payoff, an ingenious idea, a brilliant player moment, any memory you love and want to share, my guys. What is a memory you love and want to share, James? As on the spot as could it be?
It's funny because of all the questions on the list, that's the one I feel least able to answer. This is because it requires memory, not thought creation, if that makes sense, right? So I'm going to continue explaining why while I come up with it. No.
Yeah.
Overall, for me, I really like when a player has something like realizes what I was going for, if that makes sense. This has taken a lot of practice, but the idea that when a player has the epiphany you wanted them to have. And for me, it's difficult because I find myself a lot of the time, I find players tend to want to figure out what I'm thinking, which makes it difficult for me because often I'm giving the players options. I don't have a specific example, so I'm very sorry, but I guess I have one sort of. But the idea that a lot of times I've had players look to me to try to figure out what I was getting them to do when I really was giving them a situation that didn't have a clear answer to see what they would do.
Sure.
And it became cyclical. In one game I ran, I kept switching to a flashback of the players hanging by their necks to death. And they were asking each other, what should we do? What do we do? What does he want us to do? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you do? What is your, seems like a good time for a character moment. And one of the characters, the players really embraced it and made it a whole big character moment instead of I'm going to roll to try to break out or something. You know what I mean? I'm like, you're alive now. And I've made it clear this is a flashback. So you're not going to die. You know what I mean? Give me a little trust here. What do you want to say? What do you want to happen? And it was just, I could have done a much better job GMing it, but one of the players kind of grasping it and what I was going for really made me feel good and kind of able to pinpoint what I wanted to focus on.
That's cool. Yeah, I think I know the game you're talking about. I think I know the exact situation you're talking about, but I won't say. I'll say the person's first and last name. No, I'm just kidding.
And their address, and this is the last four of their social.
Last five. Four? How about
last
the whole
five?
Thing? No.
If you need to renew your license.
Full thing with dashes, baby.
With dashes.
With dashes for easy copy paste. Control C my identity. What about you, Jeff?
So I'm not sure if it's my all-time favorite yet because it happened very recently. So I don't know if it's still just the recent hype of it, or if it will genuinely be a lasting. I mean, the game will be definitely a lasting memory, but I don't know if it's the most in the way that the question asked. The way that themes just worked their way through so naturally and brilliantly in the Star Wars trilogy that Matt ran that I got to play in, that Barker also got to play in actually. On Matt Click on his channel, Fistful of Dice, ran a Star Wars trilogy. And it was just almost a perfect gaming experience, like in every way. Like everyone's characters were like super on. The dialogue was super snappy. The tone was like perfectly Star Wars and like perfectly Jedi. And like the themes, like people kept offering up. Like Barker kind of made a comment at the very beginning of the trilogy of like, there's no death, there's only the Force, which is a thing that kind of became something that came through the rest of the game and like mattered to like the events and the mindsets of the people who were involved in the game. And like everyone kind of had these different moments of like character progression and like tone and theme that like it was like if you wrote a Star Wars TV show and like put care into like putting all these different themes and events and character arcs and things like that into it, like it felt like that, which when you get an RPG that like flows so naturally, that's like largely still improv. Like Matt's notes were pretty simple and we were all just kind of going with whatever we felt like. But like if you look back and like said like I think they scripted that, like that feeling of like, wow, that one was on point. Everyone just really killed it and everybody locked in. And it was just, a super special moment.
I watched that trilogy and it felt like anticipating a TV show. I would highly recommend it to anybody. It's on A Fistful of Dice, the YouTube channel. And man, it's just so fun. It's so good. So yeah, I won't linger on it long and just say that I looked forward to it like TV. It was fantastic. For me, here's a story that I don't know that I've mentioned in a while, if ever. It was in a game I play in called The Provokers, and The Provokers is sort of my first online role-playing experience a few years ago, and it grew into something way cooler and larger. But in one of the sessions in the first season, there was this really neat session that Matt set up with my character. It's a paladin by the name of Durgan Bloodmountain, reuniting with his father. And it was this really interesting scene, and it was very emotional, but in a cathartic sort of cool way. And in the heat of the moment, I was talking in character, and I was like kind of like shouting at my, in-game dad. And I said something like, I would go this far, and I would go as far as crossing, the Bleak to Celine. And in that moment, my brain made a connection between that game, The Provokers, and another campaign that I was playing in called The Winds of Celine. And up until that point, the game worlds weren't linked, but I sort of like spewed that out. And it was kind of in that moment that I was like, wait, is this in the same universe? And so that was kind of a really cool moment because that wasn't the intention when we started these two very separate campaigns. And then eventually it grew into the realm known as Arbitron, which is canonically all those worlds do actually exist in the same universe. And so that was a really cool moment for me.
I just want to circle back real quick because I was put so on the spot, and I basically just talked until I did think of something.
Man, I was so sad. I was like, man, I put him on the spot so hard. But
it was like, of all the other questions, I'm like, I could come up with something for almost all of them, but trying to remember, I was like, nope, I'm lost. But you reminded me.
I feel bad.
Absolute number one top ever was when Barker, the resolution to "You're now looking through Gaharl's eyes," when my character in the Celine game that we were playing, after going through sort of a poison or a poison dart style forest, I see my enemy and I go and start choking the life out of them. And there's a really cool reveal there that I, up to that point, didn't think would have been possible in a role-playing game with people that you didn't let in on the secret. And so I don't even want to ruin it. So basically, Celine game, really cool. Barker, Be a Better Game Master, ran it for me. And that is absolutely, I would say, at this moment, the number one time playing RPGs that I was like, oh my gosh, what? So
yeah,
definitely hands down that one.
And without spoiling it, it was one of those things where when you watch Fight Club for the second time and you're like, yeah, it's about as clear as it could be without saying it explicitly.
Exactly. So
it's
much
like,
that,
oh! So
Barker later was like, I thought you guys absolutely knew what was going on, and the fact that we couldn't. So yeah.
Shout out to Tree Zach. Sorry, he or she in the chat was like, can't have a shout out? You sure can. You can have 2. Shout out to Tree Zach with my hands up. All right.
You're not getting 3 though. That's it.
You're not
That's
getting
all
3.
we got.
Meanwhile, that's how you encourage that behavior. Give me a shout out now. I have created this ecosystem.
There you go. We'll have to be more diligent about how many shout outs we'll give and in what circumstances.
And then it shows us in a war room, and it's like, the king requires his shout outs, and we're low. The treasury is low. You're a mage in that scenario, Jeff. I'm sorry. You got a big robe with a hood. Not a hood. What's the Doctor Strange collar? This is your life. I'm sorry. So say the heroes.
Luckily, I prepared my create shout out at a level 3 spell, so I'll be able to bail us out. I'm over here, government bailouts of shout outs with my magic.
That's why you're the master of coin and shout out. So that was great. Great question, Matthew. Douglas Knight, he says, there are so many brilliant players in the AdTab group. What is the process you follow in deciding who to play in your games? And do you bias towards players you've gamed with before disadvantaging others who would love to game with you? Genuine question, not been rejected before. Jeff, hit me.
Yeah, this one's always just a candid one. Yes, I do. I care about people. I play with people who I play with more often than I play with new people. It's just kind of a reality of my current gaming landscape. Like a lot of the games that I play in are campaigns. I'll still do one shots here and there, but most of them are long running experiences. And when you're committing to dozens of hours into something that's going to be by the time you get to like a 10 session or more campaign, you want to make sure that the people involved are going to give the experience that you want. That's a lot of time to commit to something you want to be fun. And people who you know will be great. It's a more sure bet than people who you don't. And yeah, there's a mix. I think an important mix of like, when I run games, especially campaigns, or when I look to play in campaigns that'll go on a long time, I want the people in it to be solid, people who I can trust, and people who I can work with very easily and very often. And not have to worry about like, are they going to do something crazy? What if their style doesn't match, and anything like that. And then, moments like one shots and, small little 2 or 3, session trilogies and things like that, or playing in other people's games. I'm much more willing to sort of let the guard down and just play with whoever and get new people in and, try new people out and kind of see if people will click. So yeah, there definitely is, at least for me personally, just to be completely honest, an element of playing with people who I've played with before, just because, there's only so much time and you want it to be fun. And if you have a group who you love and you trust really well, you're going to get good games out of them. And that's just kind of the bottom line. But there is something to be said, definitely, for trying to play with new people and seeing if those people will work with you well. And trying to find new ways to get other people involved. Like, you don't want it to be a sort of insular clique where no one else is ever allowed to play, because that's not good for the group, or for the other people. It's a balancing act. It's something that I think about, and I'll take certain opportunities to very much try to deviate away from that, and specifically try to play with people I've never played with before. But at least from my point of view, it is, just kind of a reality of the experience with the way that my games tend to go right now.
Yeah, and I think something that I do, just to kind of, I don't want to repeat what you just said, and I'll just say that I agree with everything you said, but then I'm going to take it a step further. Like, what's the process I follow in deciding who plays in my games? I haven't run games in a while. That's going to change in 2020. But the thing that I'll do is I will look at your comment history. So I don't like stalk your life on your personal Facebook page, but I will see how you interact with other human beings in the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. just at a glance. Are you posting often? Are you being constructive? Are you contributing to the community? Which is actually really funny because based on that criteria, I wouldn't choose myself for games. But you know, in a world, but generally speaking, though, that's how I do it. And I have been really trying to pick players who I haven't gamed with as much. So kind of like something that we talked about in another video, having an anchor player that you know, like, hey, if the wheels fall off the wagon, this person I know will sort of like shoulder the weight of making this 4 hours fun, no matter who else shows up. That is like, okay, that's my anchor. You'd also be surprised. There are a couple of, you know, I have no qualms about messaging someone else and going, hey, Jeff, I know you ran a game for Douglas Knight. How was he? Like,
yep.
You know what I mean?
I have done exactly that many times. It's people talk, you know, it
Sure.
is true.
And so, and why? Because of all of the things in my life that I have in terms of currency or valuables, time is so important to me. And so if I'm like, okay, this is risky, it's like, I want to make sure to do my homework and make sure that the 4 hours plus I'm going to be spending, instead of, you know, playing a game with my daughter or spending time with my wife, is something that's going to be as productive as possible. And the best way to do it is to get all the good ingredients in there. So I just check and see how you generally behave in public, in the group at least. And then from there, I'll maybe ask around a little bit. Also, it never hurts to be cool in your interest post response. The single word interest works well if I know you, right? So like in a certain group, Nico Dawson can type the word keen and it's almost like a golden ticket into the game. Because I know
Yep.
Nico, right? You know, it's like, boom, that's it. Oh, Nico's in? Sick. Another person who I don't know as well, use that as an opportunity to maybe post a character portrait and give, hey, I'd love to explore monster hunting like you mentioned it, and I'm thinking of, and just a little paragraph, and kind of I'm like, oh, cool. Look at the level of investment on the post. That's a good omen, you know? So that's kind of my vibe on that.
So we didn't really touch on this before, but if you guys just say all the things you can think of, all I get to do is type the little Shift-6 caret to point at what you both said.
Well, I also know that you were answering a question by Trezak in the chat. Trezak was asking some general questions, and James was actually doing a really cool idea of like going in. And so I took all the ideas out of your head, and I
was going to say that was like 5 minutes ago. Yeah. No, in all seriousness, though, I think an interesting part is to consider, like I said, all of what Tim and Jeff said, but also consider what you look like as someone posting interest. So this falls under the make sure it looks interesting. You know what I mean? Be someone that seems interesting, be someone that's in the community. But taking that a little bit further, remember that most times, I would say almost in every single case, you were not picked, not because you were taken out of the pool, but because you simply weren't chosen. And so the person that asked this question, I think it was Dwayne, but I don't remember. The person that Douglas Knight asked this question, it mentioned, oh, they haven't necessarily been snubbed, and that's not why they're asking. But it does take a long time to get into games sometimes. My trick for never having to choose players, one is not running games. Haha, we all made that joke. Second is if I put the exact day and time the game is going to be, I usually get little enough interest that I have 4 people and can just choose them.
Sure.
If I have 5, I'll have a backup. One person will drop out by the day, and then everybody gets to play, basically. And so really, I don't have a crazy process, but it's difficult when you see... Let me end with this. If you see 20 people have posted interest, don't get your hopes up and don't feel bad if you're not chosen, because at some point, somebody on the other end had to choose from 20 people, you know? So just consider that, hey, it takes a lot to get into a game.
Yeah. And I think something that I will second that Tim said that I do as well is like, you know, what you say publicly, people do pay attention to. And I don't just mean that as some sort of like idle threat of like, oh, this guy's being a jerk, but like in the opposite way, it works very well too, of like, talk a lot about the sorts of games that you enjoy, like in terms of like, what style of play you like, the things that really like make the game enjoyable to you. And like be open about those things, because people who also like those things will take notice that you like the same things as them. Like I've picked players for games before that I didn't know specifically because, somebody made a post about the way they like combat to be run, and they made a comment about how they like combat. And I was like, he likes combat like almost the exact same way that I like my combat. So if I see that person then post interest in my game, it's like, okay, I know that if I do pick him, there's always still some X factor gamble of like, I don't know this guy personally, so who knows? But everything that he's ever said makes me think that he likes the same sort of game that I like. So I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be a good fit. So I'll give it a try. Like, and as far as kind of process goes, like, yeah, play style for me is like the number one thing that I look for, especially if the game that I'm running is very specific as far as like tone, where it's just like, okay, I want this game to be emotional. I want it to be, for it to be super RP and for it to kind of have, impact in that way. So even this person that I normally play with and really like, they might not be a great fit for that specifically, but this other person who's really into that sort of deep, vulnerable role play, even if I don't play with them as much in most of my regular games, they're perfect for this one. So I'm going to, so play style and the way that the game is trying to be, can matter a lot there as well.
Lightning round, 2 quick things. First, Jeff posted interest in like no less than 20 games in the AbTab group before he got chosen.
Oh yeah, more than that. Yeah.
Right? So there's that. And then the second thing, Barker from Ignite Inspire the Story made a sick point. He said, it's a nice touch to game with one new person every one shot. So you're not getting into a campaign scenario with them, but it's like, boom. So yeah, those are also a couple good tips. Josh Glisson, longtime supporter of Tabletop Terrors. If your creative days came to an abrupt end safely, after all your current projects ended, which project would you want to be your legacy? Who wants to take that?
So I think that question to some degree is extremely difficult, we'll say, as well as, in my opinion, sort of the opposite. There's a really good word for that, but the opposite of the way I look at it, right? So in a sense, I want every project I'm working on to be my legacy, but at no point do I feel like I could stop, because I don't think I could ever point back at something and go, that's it, that's the best I'll ever be, and that's the end. I understand the hypothetical idea of if, your creative days ended nicely, whatever, but I'm like, really, in my opinion, that doesn't end until I die. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not going to stop. So I understand, like I said, that's a little almost going around the question, but it's important to note that part of my motivation comes from the idea that every next thing will be a part of the legacy, and that no thing will ever be the best thing, and that I will always continue creating, pushed by the fact that I like to think I can do even better next time.
Yeah, I'll second James's sort of cop-out approach, and just like, this is going to sound way more grim than I mean it to. There's no way for my creativity to end safely. Like, it's just like, it's not possible with the way that my brain works. Like, it's just so much a part of who I am, and like kind of like the way that I identify myself, that like the idea of like, I'm not going to create things anymore. Like, it's not possible for me to imagine that scenario without something having like come to harm me in some way, which I again, I know is like way more of a dark way to go about this than perhaps is appropriate. But if I had to answer the question at its face and just say, okay, I'm going to accept that even though it's not possible, I'll just take that as it is. In terms of things that I'm a part of now that I will look back on for sure. At this point, I'd probably say either Dead Man's Guide or Glyph. Glyph's very much in the beginning stages of the process, but it still started, so I'm still counting it. Those are the things that I'm most proud of that I do right now, or at least as far as ideas that I have. But yeah, the real answer is the same as James's answer, which is like, I think the thing that I'll be most proud of I haven't done yet. And any legacy capped where it is right now would not be, a satisfying end to my creative career, as it were.
This is probably the worst time to announce my retirement. I'm out. No, I'll say, so I'm going to lean into the question then, Josh, and I'll take the opposite stance just for the sake of rounding it out and say, I would say A Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, because I'm really proud of how we've all come together to create something that is, I think, more alive and feeling than I anticipated it being. And I'm really proud of the humanity that's in the book. Even though it's about a dark world, I feel like I've really grown to love the cultures. I've really learned to sort of like become endeared to these evil lords of ash and even the dismembered lord, and the way that these things have taken shape, because as Jeff mentioned way earlier in the stream, to say, okay guys, elevator pitch, a world where evil has won. That's the easy part, The hard part is saying, all right, now how does that trickle down and run like black grease over every crevice and crack of the world? And deciding that with Barker, Matt, Jeff, James, the playtesters such as Lloyd, everyone involved, Alexander Kostic, John Pintar, Jake Perez, whenever you name everybody, you're always at risk of missing the one person who has the single tier. I'm thinking of you too. But I'm very proud of what we've created with that many people and the scope and quality level that I feel that it is. So yeah, I would say A Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, but as they say, I believe that it's just going to be planting a flag in the new bar that we will then eclipse in 2020. So
I did think of another cop-out answer, but an even better one, and I want to share that one.
Oh, good.
If I seriously had to think about it, because in my opinion, none of the things have been so greatly affected simply by me, like any of the stuff Absolute Tabletop or Tabletop Terrorists I have been so integral that if I weren't there, it wouldn't be good or wouldn't be the same, right? I feel like it's such a group effort that, putting that aside, the fact that I was a part of it, to me, the company Absolute Tabletop and the YouTube channel Tabletop Terrors would be the thing that stands the most, simply because it so clearly translates directly into what we're doing right now. We have a live stream. People are curious what we think. They're asking us questions. The idea that the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group has brought so many people together, the fact that I met Jeff, all these great people in the chat, the people that I have gamed with, some people that I haven't spoken to in years, but met through the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group, the ones that come to AtCon. That's like, no, if I wanted to be remembered for something, if I can flip that and remove myself from sort of that philosophical talk of, well, I'll never be happy with it, I would hope that somebody would point to those things as the things that were my legacy. And that's the best I can give you.
I don't feel like that's a cop-out answer. I think that that's probably the flagship answer, which is, and when you talk about a word like legacy, you talk about the lasting effect over generations. I mean, that's really what a legacy is. And I think that the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group is probably that. So yeah, I gotta flick that, ring that bell. All right, Nibs, catch you later. I will, I think we have your questions in there and we'll continue to go. I think we're making a decent pace for the amount of questions we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say we're a little slow. If we want to try and be a little more succinct in some of them, we might be able to get all of the questions plus
all right, let's try to do
questions if nobody asks more.
I know why. It's because we are doing what we never do in our recorded videos now. We're doing that second round, but that's part of what I think set the live stream apart. The conversational Because I wasn't
Yeah.
doing it at first, and then I thought, why does this feel more sterile than a normal live stream? And then I realized, I'm like, it's because we're not circling back.
Yeah. So
yeah,
some
or
level of
interjecting
access,
or whatever. Yeah.
Because I'm not saying I'm being succinct, to
No,
be
no.
clear. I'm just saying if we continue at this pace, there's
Nobody
no way
is.
we'll finish.
Nobody's being succinct. And so, yeah, I
Exactly.
agree.
And that's
All right.
good. Yeah.
All right. So Keel Adams says, on a scale of lightweight to turbo crunch, what are your preferences of the level of crunch in an RPG system? Now, different levels suit different tones and moods, but what is your sweet spot? Like, what's the default?
For me, I want quick resolution, but mechanical options is my sort of baseline. So I guess that the sort of poster child I'll use for this that's been really kind of at my speed lately is like Mecha Hack, where you can figure out success or fail immediately. Like it's so fast to get to, did I do this or did I not do this? You just roll the dice. If it's under the number, you did it. Done. Which I like. So like the whole like lots of math and lots of modifiers and lots of if this then that, or but if this then that, like that sort of stuff isn't as interesting to me right now. But where Mecha Hack succeeds for me in terms of crunch, if you want to call it that, is the fact that there's, lots of different pilots to choose from, lots of different mechs to choose from, different special abilities that they each get, different consumable items that they can each use, and things like that, where it's like, I can pick different abilities and those abilities matter to the game, which is important to me, which is where I think, for me personally, Fate doesn't succeed very well for me, is that it's so open that the options don't matter. You can just use any skill for anything. So the choice to be better at one thing over another doesn't matter to the game. And that's fine for some people. For me, I like my decisions to matter mechanically. So that's kind of where I like my game to sit. I want lots of options for abilities and skills and cool things that I can do that matter to the game. But I want the actual machine of the game, the engine underneath, to be super quick, super easy, and super fast.
What about you, James?
For me, I would say that Mecha Hack is a good example, and I would take it even further. The idea, Jeff, that you like the resolution to be quick, I like, because it usually carries the things along quickly. You've made the decisions first. For me, my actual preferred level of what I would call crunch, but more, I would say, is more like structure, is not something I found in RPGs and not something I think belongs in RPGs. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. But for example, there's a computer game that came out called Slay the Spire. It's a roguelike where you make a deck. I love games where you can look at what you have in your hand and go, okay, this turn, I can do this, this, and this, and it will result in this. Or I can do this, this, and this, and it results in this other thing. The hard part is in deciding which of those decisions is better, not figuring out which of the things you can do. You get that in RPGs, but like for me, I like that where I go, nope, it's a turn-based game. Or in XCOM, do I shoot this with 88% and then definitely kill this one, but might lose this guy? More the, is this the right decision, not what decisions do I have? And like I said, computer games handle that really well, but there are a lot of things that are abstracted behind that don't work at the table. So it's kind of unfair, but.
Yeah. And I think for me, I think that I like a medium level of crunch, but I don't like granular crunch. So like you can make the game as crunchy as you want, but basically one layer is okay. So as an example, if it's like, all right, cool, this is how you cast a spell. It's okay if it's like, all right, let me look at the spell description. All right, cool. And then I roll. But I don't like if then it's like, all right, cool. Now you've done that. Now figure out how well you cast the spell by doing this. All right, now write that down. And so I'm kind of in for like one complex thing as long as it gets me the end result. So I don't like compounded or like multiple levels. Because then it's like, wait, what am I doing? It also, in my opinion, puts the wrong kind of failure in. So as you're doing all this cool stuff, and Jeff and I have had this discussion where, spell attacks in D&D, some of them, it's pretty unfortunate when you have all this really cool stuff and then the creature saves and it doesn't happen at all. And it's like, ugh. So I also don't like games where the crunch dictates absolute failure, but there's so many things hinged upon it. And so that it's like, oh, at one of these points, the whole thing can fall out from under you. So I would say medium crunch. The other thing is, with the advent of like character creation tools and stuff like that, I don't mind, especially when I have the machine component, doing everything but the storytelling. So like, I'm fine with using an amped up D&D Beyond to do all the things. That's way easier. I'm like, click, 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 and then it's like, cool, let's storytell. I personally like to roll my actual physical dice, but the reason why I say that is because going into 2020 and beyond, we're in a new era where I think you're going to see games can get away with more complexity if their online complexity components, or the things that James were talking about that were more video gamey or board gamey, are handled by a computer, and then the rest of the storytelling is up to me. So I would say like middle.
And as a quick side note to tack onto that, we could, and probably will have an entire conversation about fun versus not fun failure at some point.
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, I'm
that's,
spot on with you there. In terms of how crunch can affect that. Because that's a whole topic. I don't want to dive into that right now.
Sure.
But we definitely need to do a thing about that.
Yeah, because it didn't entirely occur to me, but the style I like tends to be everybody always succeeds, but you have to succeed at the right things to do well.
There you go.
And I agree.
That's perfect. I'm actually making a note. Everyone always succeeds. All right, so or else we'll forget this. I will go to this next one. Bit of a long question. I'm going to just read the TLDR.
So should we do that one is the question.
I think we can cut through and make it quick. I feel like I want to reward people for commenting in the order they commented and not punish them, right? So it's like, you have a long, detailed question.
Let me add the quick caveat then that what we're about to talk about, we actually have recorded a whole video about. So we'll probably keep it brief here, knowing that we have an entire thing that we'll elaborate on about this question later.
Because it was good.
Well, and I was going to say, I think we should just rehash the whole video. What, is that not the same page that you... So this is Garth S., and his TLDR is... When introducing new players to 5e, is it better to run an actual one-shot with a full story arc and keep things moving along, or let them take things at their own pace with only gentle prodding to remind them of plot-based paths they have at their disposal? What do you think? Because we did just record a whole video. I have a succinct point that I'll make, but I'll let you guys go first.
So for me, I tend to just split the difference between letting people do whatever they want, and then when it looks like they don't know what that is, reminding them what things might help push the story along, but otherwise kind of letting them stumble along until they look completely lost or don't have an idea. And I go, oh, what about you? You had this ability where this, maybe you can use that to intimidate the guy that you need to talk to, and just kind of go that, because even that, maybe you could do this, get somebody else to go, oh, or I could do this spell I have, and then it kind of kicks it off again. So when there's a lull, kind of trying to feed a little bit, prodding a little bit to get it moving, but not overstepping so much that it's irrelevant.
And I'll two quick things. One, I agree with what you're saying, James. There's a game that I'm playing called Luigi's Mansion 3, and this spectral dog appears to give you hints when they believe that you're going in the wrong direction. Like, it'll pop up and bark and then disappear. Sometimes the players just need a little, polter pup. The thing I will say this, because specifically he mentions in a much longer description, the first sentence is, the pace was slow. So the railroading, or the actual, what the prodding is attempting to solve here is the pace. It's taking too long. The game's like 8 hours, 6 hours, and they're not even finishing. Matt Click taught me this on accident. He basically just did it. He will move the game along. So rather than waiting for the players to come across and say, okay, we're going to go to the throne room, because that can take 15, 20 minutes, which doesn't seem like a long time, but it adds up. He'll go, okay, so if you enter the throne room, you'll see that and he just starts as though you're going where the most logical step is. And anyone at any time can say, wait, before we go into the throne room, I would like to do X. But I've never heard Matt Click say, do you want to go to the throne room? because then it's like, well, I don't know, do we want to go to the throne room? But when he goes, so if is the key word, if you enter the throne room, you would see the thrones of the two kings sprawling, and he kind of just goes for it. And it actually works really well, in my opinion. And I think especially for new players, they'd be like, cool.
Yeah. So I think especially with new players, there's the range of possibility in tabletop RPGs is so vast, both in terms of content and play style, that it's like, as a new player, it's almost impossible to settle into what your like ultimate preferred way of playing is going to be like very early on in the process, just because there's too many options. So as a GM, I think it's like very important to set the example of the way that you want your game to feel, and part of that is pacing. So the new players may not know, that you can have a super quick pace. They may think that the only way to play is that super meandery. We just kind of go around in a hazy cloud of actions until something happens eventually. So I think it's totally okay to, especially early on, be a little bit more forward about what you want them to do, because they just might not know what to do. It could be that they're just meandering because they don't know where to go or what to do or how to play the game. It's a difficult game to sort of just jump into. So I think the more that you can guide and just kind of be upfront, and even just saying it out loud explicitly of like, I'm gonna jump ahead because it kind of seems like you don't know what to do. If there's something else that you wanted to do, let me know. But otherwise, I'm just gonna go straight to this point because that's where the next big action is gonna be. And feel free to interject, but otherwise, boom, we're in the throne room, to sort of continue that example.
Yep.
Because if you can kind of teach them, this is the sort of pace that my games go at. We have scene, boom, switch to scene. That there's not going to be a whole lot unless you specifically say, I want to do all these other things, to just interject and say, we're going here now. We're doing this now. And then once they kind of learn that feeling of like, okay, this scene has run its course, let's move on to the next one. We don't need 30 minutes of waffling about here. That's not going to add anything. The players might not know that until you show them specifically, like, okay, we're gonna cut off right there. We've done what we needed to do. Let's go to the next part. And then once they kind of get a sense for that feeling, then they can start to drive their own pacing in that way after they kind of pick up your sense of style from you in there. But yeah, you can't just expect them to know when to move forward and when to meander around. And individual table play style and all those things matter there a lot too.
Yeah, and as Jeff mentioned, we will have a full video on this at some point that we go into we can do a short form, quick tips, and a deep dive. So the next is from Taylor Jeffrey. She has a couple of questions. What setting and or system could you run with zero prep? I feel like technically some people do that all the time, but do you guys have a specific answer of maybe a system that's designed for zero prep?
So not designed for zero prep, but I can run 5e now with zero prep because I just know all the moving parts of it like the back of my hand, so that there's no like surprises in how the numbers fit together for me anymore. So like I could run 5e with no prep, just because I know everything about the system, basically. I won't say declaratively I know everything about the system, but I know the system really well. As far as settings, like Dragon Grin for sure right now, just because of how much we've been into that. Star Wars, in certain ways at least, I could just run without needing to do anything for. A lot of my own settings and systems, I could basically any setting that I've made, I could run with zero prep, because again, I just know how I want that to feel. Yeah, I think just in a lot of sense, basically any system that I use a lot, I don't need to prep. It can still be helpful to prep, but like I think if you know the numbers, then that kind of takes away a lot of the element that like prep is most useful for, of like, having stat blocks ready for monsters. Like if you know how stats work, then you can just kind of make them. But if you don't know if it's a new system or that's just not your thing, then like having that preparation is really useful. So yeah, systems I know super well. 5e being the most obvious one in the settings that I know the most well. I could run just immediately.
What about you?
Yeah,
James?
I think in general that stands true as far as systems are concerned. In my opinion, if you know it, you can usually get away with it. Of course, there are some that might be so crunchy that you couldn't. Another thing is giving a shout out to Ironsworn. It's I believe, powered by the Apocalypse style or kind of inspired game that you can specifically play co-op, and I have before. And that's really good if nobody's prepped. You don't necessarily play the GM in that case, but that's a really good system and I guess technically setting for that, because you kind of make decisions on the fly. It asks questions in a way that's really interesting, and you can kind of, it has a very small co-op system that works really well to really get going quickly. And then, like Jeff said, any universe that you've created or that you know well enough that's not 100% in concrete, because you can always throw other stuff in. You know what I mean? You're not going to have a player at the table going, well, wait, where in the Forgotten Realms are we? Because that monster only lives in the areas of Icewind Dale. And I'm like, well, that's rarely going to happen. So if I say there's an ice troll here, we're all on the same page. There's an ice troll here,
Yeah, roll with it. So for me, I actually am very excited about, well, two things. So what's a setting you could run with zero prep? I would say Dragon Grim, but not just because we created it. I think that A Dead Man's Guide has a ton of useful tools in it that would allow for literal improv. Like you could turn to the sections called the Cruxes, or like any of the Dominion of Ash, like which is like the region. There are so many different tables and plot hooks and stuff all over that connect that I think you could flip open to that section, have the map, and just roll a couple, like just go. And that was the point. But it works also so that you could read through and plan out and use those same tools. So I think that book that we're creating is very useful for on the fly stuff. The other thing is it's not out yet, but we did a really cool playtest of it at AtCon. The 5-minute RPG. The 5-minute RPG is designed specifically to run kind of on the fly with no prep. And so it's because it's roll tables and stuff. And we had a really good time doing that. So that would be my answer. And then Taylor mentions, well, I don't know. Do we want to do the other questions or just go to the next person for the sake of time?
It depends on how quickly we can answer those questions, because we can also, like the other two she asked could be answered very quickly, but we can also skip over others if you wanted.
All right, speed round. What game could you play? What kind of game could you play forever? And then what was the most recent game that left you giddy with excitement? First answer, I wish there was one, but my brain would get so tired. Sometimes time away from the table makes it better. So I don't have a game I could play forever. I always need a break to refill the cup. And then the game I played that left me giddy with excitement was a game that Jeff ran in his setting of Glyph, where we were like superheroes with Jeremy Lilly. That was like, I was giddy after that game.
Yeah, my answer to the first question is basically the same. Like I thrive off of and need variety when it comes to tabletop stuff. So like I kind of need a rotation of style to like operate at my best and fullest extent. Last game that left me giddy was the Matt Star Wars game that I mentioned earlier on.
I think that I have a somewhat unique viewpoint on the game I could play forever, because I personally love board games and the puzzle solving element as well as the competitive element. So I don't know that there's an RPG that I could play forever, but most board games I could, there are a couple that I could pick that one. Probably the one that comes the most to mind is Race for the Galaxy. It's like a little deck building game that has enough randomness, but also enough knowledge helping, having knowledge of the game helps you. I could play that game all the time forever, and I don't think I'd ever get sick of it. But it's not a role-playing game, so I don't know if that's cheating. She did say game, not role-playing game.
Yeah, she said game.
And then the one that made me the most giddy with excitement was I played in an in-person game of Tales from the Loop that Nate from WASD 20 ran at AtCon in person. It was the first time I played the session. It was at a convention. It was in person. It was just like pinnacle role-playing experience for me, and it was a really good time.
Someone said my mic is super quiet. Sorry if it's been quiet the whole time. I think I slowly got further away from it as we went through the stream. So I'll just put it a little closer to me. Sorry about that.
Tim's slowly backing away.
I'm slowly leaving. Hey guys, what's up? So hopefully this is a little better. If you're listening and it gets super loud, that's why. Micah R. Maloney says, have you ever played in a GM-less system? If so, did it feel that it ran well for its intended narrative and mechanical feel? And then, having played in one before or not, is it something you wish to see more of in the general tabletop RPG marketplace? Ironsworn, to mention what James mentioned. I have played it. It was GM-less. It was me, Matt, and James. And it was, and Barker. And it was fantastic because it's resolution system. It's not, it works well for that style. Is it something I wish to see more of? Yes. We actually tried to do it for a Dead Man's Guide and found out that D&D is not a great system for GM-less. Different than solo play. Hear me there. But we are looking at maybe doing something in the future with the world of Dragongrin, but creating a GM-less sort of system to use some of the elements in a Dead Man's Guide.
Yeah, I've never played a GM-less system before, actually. Well, I guess Fiasco technically counts, but that's so different from like the normal. Like when people say GM-less systems, that's not usually the style of game that they mean. But as far as wanting to see more of them, yeah, I mean, for me, it's not a competition. Any time that we can get more games that have different styles and ways to play, I think that's always a net good. So yeah, I'd totally be down to see more of them. And Ironsworn is high up on my list of things to try very soon. Specifically the co-op and GM-less play is a part of it that I'm very interested in.
And I think sort of to the point that Jeff said, but somewhat of a different way to look at it. To me, GM-less systems, I don't know that they'll ever reach the level that a GM'd system will. And I think we agree on that idea where it's like Fiasco is one of my favorite games that doesn't have a GM, but I agree that you don't refer to it as a GM-less system. It's just a different game, So that would be the one that I point to as well, where I'm like, Fiasco, it does what it does so well, and you don't need someone to run it. And so that's more how I look at it. You don't need someone to run it. So there's a board game called Mansions of Madness that in its first edition, one of the players had to run it. But it's a board game, so you're literally just going, okay, now this room and this monster. You had to make some decisions, but overall it was one person didn't get to play to some degree. So in the second edition, they came out with an app, and the app makes the decisions and everybody gets to play. And so that would be another weird but sort of example of if a computer handles it well, a game can be GM-less and it can work really well. But there aren't many systems like that. So that's something I'd like to see more of, is introducing that more where not one person has to be the GM, basically.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a video on that, GM-less versus like what the benefits are and all that stuff. In the home stretch here, about another 15 minutes, and that was every question except for the in-chat question. So we'll go with what you looking at. Okay, player question. My cousin's starting a new generic sci-fi game soon using Star Wars Saga. The issue is that he is creating characters for every player, backgrounds, classes, names, etc. How do you use that, craft your character, and make it yours? I don't understand why he's making your characters. And if it's a knowledge thing, so I would pump the brakes immediately personally and be like, whoa. Unless it's something you agreed to, that is a hard red light for me. I get playing pre-gens at a con or whatever. There are circumstances, but as a general rule, if it's a campaign, having someone hand me a character and say, this is who you are, is not fun for me. So how do you make that your own? Make it your own. Change stuff. And make it. So I don't know what the situation is there, but what do you guys have to say about that?
Yeah. So I'll second that. It's like, yeah, if possible, then you want to at least have input. If the GM is going to make a character because you don't know how, then at least being able to pick what options you want narratively and have them make the mechanics for it is definitely like a good starting place of like, I don't know how to make, a Jedi in Star Wars Saga. but I know I want to be a Jedi, so if you can make me a Jedi, that would be cool, and I know he's using he's not playing Star Wars universe, but just kind of as an example. The next step for me, if that's not possible, where you are just getting a pre-gen sheet, is to make the demand that you're going to divorce the mechanical parts of the pre-gen and remove any social demands about the character. So like, okay, you get to pick what class. You've picked my class, you've picked my skills, you've picked that, but I still get to pick my personality, and I still get to pick what I do. You can't take that part from me. So even if I'm going to be, so and so, and that's going to be my background, those are going to be my stats. Like, you don't get to tell me that I have to act a certain way or that I have to make certain types of decisions. Those are the sorts of things that like I'm not willing to give control up over, and just kind of drawing the line in the sand there. If that's the latest point in the process that you have input, I would definitely make that a hard red light, as Tim said. Like, no, like that's the part I'm not going to give up. Like, I'm going to pick my own personality, my own ideals, my own bonds and motivations. Like, I need to make those for myself.
Yeah, and I think it's everything we were afraid of, in the sense that Josh mentioned that it was because he's a control freak, not because people don't know. So with that said, I agree mostly with Jeff, where as much as you can, change the parts of it that don't matter mechanically necessarily to match what you want. So for example, in like 5th edition, you have your traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. Those, I just, if I have a pre-gen, I just pretend they don't exist and then make up my own, come up with my own, or if I like them, I role play them. Separating the mechanics from the name and what you might look like and everything, deciding those things for players that want to decide those things will never go well. So, Josh, it sounds like you have a very specific circumstance, and in that case, make the character your own as much as you can. And that, I'm not sure.
Yeah. And he mentioned in the chat he's going to press the matter and kind of go from there. It could just be that person is like, they're shouldering the weight of new system, new world. They might not even know what people are called yet. And so so there might be reasons. So I would end with this in terms of this question. Ask them why. If it's just because they're a control freak, I am sorry for you, especially if you're kind of beholden to play in that game. Alon W says, how do you add challenges to social encounters? Is it easy to add challenges to combat or skill challenges or exploration? But I'm having difficulty making social encounters feel challenging. What do you say, Jeff?
So it's more difficult because the mechanics are less defined and potentially non-existent. Like, you can make a monster more difficult just by making it do more damage or having more hit points. None of those things really apply to social encounters unless the system you're using has a social battle system, which some do. But I'm going to assume that's not the case. I'm going to assume that this is probably like 5e or something like that. And the second part that makes it more difficult is that it's very table dependent, in the sense that social encounters always have the emergency button of the party just deciding to ignore them. And if that's the play style of the group, then it makes it more difficult. Like, if talking to this guy isn't getting them what they want and the party's willing to just take out weapons and kill him, like, then there's not really a whole lot that you can do to make the conversation more challenging. If any time they'll just pull that ripcord and just, decide not to engage. But as far as the actual encounter itself, making it more challenging, demanding compromise or difficult decisions from the party, I think, is always a great way. So if you need to get something out of people from using conversation, then whatever the party's natural inclination to do in that situation usually is, make the NPC require something different than that. So if the party will just very quickly resort to threats of violence, like that, like, we're done playing nice, we'll just I'll pull out my dagger, I put it at his throat and say, tell me or I'm going to kill you. Like, have those sorts, if that's what they usually do, then just make it so that is not an acceptable answer. Maybe this guy's so committed, so loyal to the secret that he's not going to give it up, even if he dies, it's going to take something different. So he'll just say, okay, kill me. You'll never know. Like, okay, basically whatever they like to do, try to subvert that a little bit and require a different solution to kind of keep them on their toes. Because I think it's very easy to sort of fall back into brute force or to like very specific ways of talking or role playing with NPCs. And if you can shake that up and require them to think in a different paradigm than they usually do, that is going to be a challenge because it's difficult to sort of work through that process on the fly, especially with role play because it is so dynamic.
Yeah, and I think something you can't use this every time, but something that will make social encounters challenging is accuse the players of something, which is always like, that usually gets people immediately like, what? No, what? They immediately care because as people, many have an innate sense of justice and they're like, no, that's not true. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you can't directly accuse them of something, have them affected by it. So a social encounter could be, limiting their resources because something negative happened and they need to, like, hey, we're only letting 10 people into the city today. And sorry, we've already let those 10 in. And just throw that on them and it's like, well, what? They can't sneak in. They can't, basically make it so that they have to feel the pain of something outside of their control. And in many cases, they will have vested interest and because social encounters, like you said, Jeff, it's like that emergency button of like, yeah, I don't care. Not my circus, not my monkey. But if you make it affect them, and an easy way to do that is like, if, as Jeff mentioned, take the thing they love and put it at jeopardy, but it doesn't have to be painful or anything like that. As an example, you've got that player that's always like, hey, I want to look for magic items. Just make it so that, actually, magic items for now are outlawed. And a person approaches you asking you why you're looking for them. And then it's like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, that thing you love and you really like. Yeah, now it's like, now you have to, why were you talking about magic items? And you got to know what the players love, but put that thing at jeopardy and make them care because you can't fake caring. So that would kind of be something that I would do as well. Because then the players will want to do that. Right that wrong or explain why they have magic items. Make them talk about something they care about as actual people, and it's sort of automatic.
Yeah. One quick thing I'll add to finish that point off is just to like demand compromise. So like make it so that whatever their ideal solution is, they have to give something up to get it. That there's no just like, okay, yep, we've got it. That was cool. You can only get the information you need if you also do this job for this guy, or you can get the information you need, but you have to break this law and you'll be investigated. So like no matter what they do, they can get what they want, but it's going to come at a cost. I think like success at a cost is very important in social encounters, where it's not just like, okay, yep, you persuaded him, you got it, you can move on. Because you can definitely guarantee success in a roleplay encounter, but if you can enforce consequences for whatever way they go about making their decision and engaging with the encounter, then that can bring up challenges not in the moment, but by forcing consequences down the line, they'll have to be more aware of what they do in that moment and kind of make adjustments then.
Anything you want to add to that, James?
No, I disconnected at some point and I was handling the chat, and it sounds like you guys covered it great. So
we'll just recap since you disconnected. So what Jeff said was...
yeah, I'll say it again real quick.
Dude, take two. So also, if you're not reading the chat, Barker is fire. He is just
dropping hot ignition fire.
Bombs.
Yeah, dude. He's like, ignite the answers here. So Nib says, I have a question. As a player, how do you pull information or direction from a DM? I play a game where the DM uses homebrew and a sandbox style. There are times where we just don't know where to go or what to do, and the DM says, well, you can do whatever you want, but gives little actual direction. I think we hit on this peripherally a few other times in the video. I think that it is the game master's job to meta maybe give some reminders. This is my opinion. Give some reminders about what's important or what has previously happened, at least. If they don't want to advance anything or give you any clues to what to do next, at least recap what has happened. Well, the prince is upset because this happened. The queen has recently been, robbed, and so that's kind of going on over here. Do any of those things interest you? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that exact idea, where even in a sandbox game, if the players are like, you start the session and you're like, okay, you can go anywhere you want. Here's a map. If the players aren't immediately like, oh yeah, that guy that stole the thing, as a GM, you should be offering. And remember that the last thing you did, I just start talking and kind of recapping and sort of doing some exposition until someone goes, oh yeah. And then the players will kind of take it and start talking about the elf that stole the thing that they forgot about, or whatever it might be. So I totally agree that to some degree it's up to the GM, and saying you can do anything can invite a really awkward session if that's not totally random, go wherever you want, isn't the game you're playing.
Yeah, a total 100% sandbox game requires very, very specific players to work. Like people, there are players who are like exceptionally good at like Lloyd Collins, for example, is a great example of someone who like you could just say, "You're in the world, go," and like he'll immediately have a 10-page document of all the motives that he wants to pursue, all the different ways he's going to enforce his plan, and build up his sphere of influence to achieve his goals, and like. But he's a rare instance for that sort of player. Like most people are not going to want to do all that. So if you are going to be in a total sandbox game, you either want some player, one, if not multiple of them, to be like hyper motivated with their own goals and can kind of make their own fun in that sort of way. Or you need to demand that the GM give you something to work with and just say, look, like I appreciate that you're giving us freedom to sort of find our own story here. That's really cool. But we could use something to start with, just some piece of direction to kind of give us somewhere to look, because there's so many options right now that we don't even know where to start. So just sort of like being upfront of like, it would help me out as a player to know that we have a couple specific things that we can pursue, and I'd really appreciate it if we could find something to grab a hold of, because not every player can just drive their own entire game, and that shouldn't be the expectation for the players to feel the entire burden of progressing a game. Most games will have some level of GM involvement.
Yeah, and I think the communication is key, and just kind of mentioning it, like you said, Jeff, that's a very, I think, positive way to say, hey, can you at least just give us the diving board to jump into the pool, please? So we're at time. However, so I know James has to go. Specifically, Jeff, are you down to stay a few extra minutes, or do you have to also jump off to wrap up the questions?
Yeah, no, I'm down to stay and make sure that we hit the rest of the questions people asked. I don't want to leave those hanging if we can help it.
Yeah, we've got about 3 or 4 left. So James, totally bounce. We are at time, and I know that it'll be quick, but thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Jeff and I will finish up and try to hit on any of the questions that we didn't get to that are also in the chat. So, James, man, any final words?
No, overall, I think that's it. I think that it's hilarious. You say this is going to take a few minutes to answer these next 6 questions. So I'll hit you up in 2 hours when you guys are done. But
yeah, dude. No, now that I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, Jeff has no plans. I have no plans. Jeff has plans.
Right. Well, Jeff, I was going to say, Jeff didn't say he had no plans, but
I actually don't this semester
Oh,
I don't have plans. So
Tabletop Terrors-a-thon. All right, guys, we're going to crack the 2-hour mark. No, I'm just kidding.
But in all seriousness, thank you for everyone that showed up. We got a ton of really nice words in the chat, and it was great to see people that I recognize, people that I've never seen before, people that said they were just subscribing. We only had one thing that I had to delete from the chat because somebody, I think, clicked randomly from YouTube. So overall, very good stream. I was very happy to see everybody. And
surprisingly, that's the same person that subscribed. It was Doug's.
There must have been a message that you missed because yeah. So, but with that, hopefully nobody saw it, and I will hopefully see everybody next time we do a live stream.
Oh, I found it. I'll read it here. No, I'm just kidding. And their last name. No, thanks, James. Have a good night. Tell Cassie we said hey. So the next question is by Barker. Ignite, inspire the story. Jeff, how do you feel about players making up connections with NPCs and locations on the fly without consulting the GM? Sort of like GM makes the main story, players make the sandbox elements. How do you feel about that?
So my feeling about the players without any consultation putting in their own elements is directly proportional to my trust and comfort with that player. There are people who I would trust to do this in a snap with no hesitation, no problem. Barker being an example of somebody like that, who I know what they contribute is going to advance the game. It's going to advance, the themes and important things that they care about, and it's going to add to their character and to the world. If it's somebody who I don't know as well, there's always the hesitation that they either don't really have a great sense of the feel that I want, and they might go against that, or that they'll just do something completely absurdist out of left field. There's always the risk that it's just going to be, intentionally stupid. So I can kind of go back and forth with it of like, if it's somebody I play with a lot and trust, then they can absolutely basically have carte blanche to add whatever they want to. And I'll be like, yep, that's awesome. And it's in forever. If I don't know them as well, I'll tend to be a little bit more about what I'll allow in terms of that sort of thing.
Like, I don't know you like that. Just back off. This is the first date. I don't think you're going to be creating any connections tonight. No. So I'm with you, Jeff. It's directly proportional to my trust, and I'll even say this. I as a player, when I do make up those things, I go in with the verbalization and with the intent of saying, hey, if it's cool. So like, I'm always using these as jumping off points because I don't know what the plot might hold and if that would like totally shift, but I've gotten way better at taking what they say and remolding it into what I wanted anyway. So as a game master, and then so like if they are like, hey, I would really love, that character from my background who is constantly one-upping me, and I'm like, yeah, I know. If they were like, yeah, I would love it if she is here, I could think, okay, cool, I already have someone who is going to be here and run into the party. That's actually better. So, yes. I'd be like, yeah, that's great. And you see her, and then I would probably throw it to them, and I'd be like, what does she say to you? And maybe let them set the tone a little bit. But if they say something like, now let's talk about the opposite. Let's say I know that person who is their foil, who is kind of in their background, is the end reveal, that they're the masked bounty hunter that's been following them the whole time. I would maybe say, actually, I kind of had something else planned for them, if that's cool. And if they were like, oh, okay, yeah. If not, they're like, no, I'd really love, okay, cool. I would probably just roll with it and figure out how to make it work or change it, because those sort of fractals usually end up being the happiest accidents that you never would have thought of on purpose, but end up being those pieces that fall into place if you handle them well. So yeah.
And I think you make a really good point about it. Like, the understanding of that situation from both the GM and the player should always be that those sorts of in the moment, no clearance suggestions are always a negotiation, not a fact. So you can say, I think this town should exist and have this thing, with the understanding that the GM could say, well, actually, this might not work exactly like that for these reasons, but I'm willing to sort of maybe say that it's like this instead of that. Does that work for you still? And like, with having that understanding of like, there might be reasons that those suggestions don't work for knowledge that you don't have as a player yet. And that, making small adjustments and edits to those suggestions on the fly to get them to a place that works for everybody. Like, that's, I think, the mindset that both parties should go into it with.
Sure.
In terms of like, it's okay to suggest it, but it's also okay that it might not pan out every time.
Yeah, and knowing that you can always tweak with minor retcons later. Like, I'm not talking about everything is fluid, nothing matters, but oh, hey, remember, can we have it so that she actually ran into me 20 minutes later after we already talked to the guy, because that makes more sense. It's cooler conflict. Yeah, that'd be great. You know, that kind of stuff. I'm fine with that. So, yeah, I think in a collaborative environment, just like any other collaborative environment, yeah, it's like, yeah, let's make something cool together. Ryan Castle says, DMing a game for kids 9 and 13, done a bunch of goblins and bugbears. Any recommendations for next monsters or adversaries to throw at them? Next, we're headed to a Lost Mines of Phandelver game. So I'm gonna ignore the Lost Mines of Phandelver part and say that for me, I think kids that age really latch on to a sort of iconic, scary villain. So like if you did something where it was like Macario, you know, the Mind Flayer, some sort of like thing that they can hear whispers of. You might even make it like an evil cleric who has blood red eyes, who kind of like shows up. But basically, I would make it this sort of iconic bad guy that looks a certain way that they don't really encounter right away, but they start hearing in the mouths of the goblins and the bugbears. So like the next one they encounter, they're like, you know, no, Macario will kill it. And these things that are monsters are afraid of this bigger thing. I think that's cool. So I would start introducing like a big bad just by name. Figure out nothing else. Just start seeding the name and like the vibe of like, oh yeah, there's this like sort of not mythical, but notorious figure in this area named Macario. And I think that would be super cool. As a 9 to 13-year-old, I'd be like, what? Who's this Macario? We got to find more out about them. And then you have yourselves a campaign.
Yeah. So I don't actually know Lost Mines of Phandelver very well. So my ideal suggestion, if I did, would be to basically start, if there's a primary type of enemy in that campaign that's going to be featured, start to introduce that type of thing. So you can kind of transition from the sort of goblins, bugbears feel into, you know, like if I don't know what it's about, so I'm just going to make something up of like, if Lost Mines of Phandelver is about dragons, then like kobolds or something. So you can kind of introduce the lower level of dragonkin type monsters and build into what will eventually be the dragon enemy, or so on like that. Something like that, some sort of transitional element to sort of introduce the feel of Lost Mines of Phandelver could be good. And then again, I'll kind of second what Tim said, especially with younger kids. I think it's generally easier to like stick with like obviously like bad and scary monsters and or like very obvious villainous people. Like a lot of my games tend to feature very like human conflict of like people fighting with people. But that can kind of have a lot of weird moral questions. So if there's a cool monster that you really like, or that you can kind of transition into Lost Mines to really work with, then yeah, finding something like that along those lines, I think is always a good way to go. And yeah, I'd second what Tim said too. Just having a cool name to drop as an obvious bad guy to start building up to is always fun.
Yeah, and I was doing just a quick cursory search. I have a D&D Beyond account, and I was just looking at like level 2 monsters and just kind of seeing, well, challenge rating 2 monsters, which isn't necessarily the same, but I think that I would probably, if you're specifically looking for something that is that low level, aside from what Jeff and I said, right now, goblins and bugbears, although not intelligent, are thinking and reasoning. So I would probably go with something more feral and animalistic. So whatever that would be. So something that is less, so like a carrion crawler or like a bullet or like something that's not going to be reasoned with and it's not like swords and shields, something that's a little more monstrous and you can really do some cool stuff with the environment and that kind of thing. So I would kind of probably change it up that way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. Hey, we're nearing the end here. I have 10 secret surprise super questions. No, I'm kidding. Alon W says, is daily damage coming back at some point? Really enjoyed that as well. I'm looking for the format in which to do it. to do it consistently. I would love to do that. Just being frank with you, YouTube penalizes you for streaming if you don't have a lot of viewers, unfortunately. So then do you do it on Twitch? But we don't have any Twitch followers. And then you could do it on Facebook, but then people don't get the notifications because not as many people are on our Facebook as there are YouTube. So then I was using restream.io, which streams all of them, but you still have the Facebook conundrum where some people get the notifications there, and then the YouTube conundrum where YouTube penalizes you if you don't have a bunch of people watching. So I would like to find the format. I think yes at some point. I don't know. What do you think, Jeff?
So I mean, we've talked about doing some potential stuff like that. Like, I don't know if it would be. I know that they're pretty short, but something like stories might be able to fill that sort of role where you can put out just small things consistently. I don't think that those are live though, so that I don't know if that would quite get the same thing. I am open to the idea of doing more just like whenever streaming content, even if it is on a different platform. Like, sure, maybe not everybody will jump ship from the YouTube channel to Twitch, but we don't need everybody to jump ship over to Twitch. You know, if we get 10 people to show up, then that's cool. You know, if we get 2 people to show up and chat, then that's cool. You know?
Yeah, I'm down.
So I'm open to that sort of thing. Again, it's just a matter of schedule and consistency. If it's something we're gonna do, I want it to be something that we can do sustainably, so that it's not gonna be overwhelming and constant in terms of like the burden that it's gonna put on us to maintain. I think it's very important to find a way that we can do it, especially if people want that, without burning out on it. So yeah, I'm open to formats and ways to do it, but you have to be wary of exactly how.
So I think that you're onto something with like, and I've been thinking about it for a while, but I think maybe it's a great opportunity to try Twitch. And again, that does not hit the scheduling portion and the consistency. So we'll put a pin in that and just figure that out. But I think that would be good to kind of jump over to for the more regular, constant live streams. It's like, hey, if you're interested in that, jump over to Twitch and you'll see a bunch of sort of freeform content. And then YouTube is more curated. And so maybe kind of leaning into something like that. So yeah, it's definitely something to look at.
That's the balance that a lot of like content creators find a lot of like really good sort of success with. It's like you have your YouTube channel to like make videos and do that, you know, and then you have Twitch to just like do whatever, you know, like, and you can do stuff on there that you wouldn't normally do. Like even if you did like a Twitch stream about like a video game that had nothing to do with tabletop, like that sort of stuff is a lot more acceptable on that sort of platform than it would be like on YouTube, where it's like, you know, you have to be very consistent with the type of content you put on one channel. So yeah, it's something to be open to. Like, I don't want to make any commitments right now, but
well, I think we should probably decide it while James isn't here and commit to everyone watching and anyone who watches after he watches.
Yeah.
So
well, and again, that is something nice about streaming, is that like we wouldn't all have to be there every time either. Like, you know,
sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that, I completely agree with that. So, all right, we'll say that it is more of a possibility now than it was 5 minutes ago.
Yep.
Probably by 50%. So I want to point out just a very good comment in terms of Barker with another fantastic answer. There are plenty of really good answers in the chat. So if you want to, you can go back and just even read the chat. Would be probably as beneficial, if not more beneficial, than watching the video. But Barker mentions in terms of the 9 to 13-year-olds, consider what the kids have seen or are interested in. So like Lord of the Rings, Orcs and Evil Wizards, Harry Potter, Trolls, Wraiths, Witches, and Liches. Marvel, Thanos. You know what I mean? Like, create Xanos, and even if they get it, they're like, oh my god, Xanos with a gauntlet, and they'll usually not mind. They love that they're fighting their Thanos. I have to just mention real quick, Dougster says, what about podcasts instead of daily videos? And then he says, don't get my hopes up, I would be all over that. And Chris Johnson says, same thing. So if I may, very quickly, every week we essentially have a short video and a podcast, but it's in video form. I'm thinking of taking the audio and putting it on like Podbean for people who just want to listen. But essentially every week on Thursday, we release a video podcast. and we do like what we call a deep dive. They're between 30 minutes and an hour. And so, Dougster, I think you just subscribed. I would highly recommend jumping back at least a couple weeks, 3 weeks, and start there, and you'll have plenty for your commute, at least for a couple days. Let's see here. Final couple questions.
There's one more actually.
Oh, final question.
Well, he's got kind of a two-parter, but it is the last person.
Oh, gotcha. So, Jeff, when you DM, how do you feel about modules? And do you prefer modules or homebrewed settings and stories?
I don't use modules basically at all. I and that's not that I don't think that they're good or that I don't find them useful. I totally get why people do like them, and I would never like say that they're less of a good method in any sort of broad sense. But just for me, the sort of creativity of like the world building and the NPC building and like the encounter building, like that's the part that I like when it comes to running games. Like the reason that I run a game at all is because if I come up with an idea that I want to make into a real thing. So that's just kind of where the fun is for me in the whole process. So modules don't really do it for me. There are modules that I've like taken things from of like, oh, this is a cool item or a cool NPC or a cool encounter idea. I might use a modified version of that somewhere. But just in terms of running games, yeah, I can't really do the module thing. And just, I find them really difficult to run with just the way that my brain is wired. Like it's much easier for me to create that information than it is for me to try to like parse out a module and like find a way to coherently present it. Like to me is way infinitely more challenging than if I just have control over the information myself. So it's difficult for me to run modules, so I tend to stay away from it, especially because I enjoy making my own stuff. Like that's something that I like about GMing.
Yeah, and I feel like the barrier of entry for me for any kind of module is that I don't really have the time to read it beforehand. My prep's very circumstantial to where we're at and what I need to run and what I need to prep. And so I totally get how a module would be like a steak to someone who, if their entire thing was like, yeah, D&D is my hobby, I read the module for fun and then I run it. Whereas for me, we're doing things like this. I mean, we've been streaming for almost 2 hours. This is the time I would have to read a module, and I would rather do this than that. Working on absolute tabletop books until the wee hours of the morning. I'd rather do that than read a module. I've tried a couple of times I was like, I'm going to read this and I'm going to run it. And I get Jeff, I probably 5 pages in and I'm like, exactly what you said. I have 15 ideas of what I would want to do with the information. And I have no interest on how the book ends. I tried doing it with Curse of Strahd. I tried doing it with Lost Mines of Phandelver. And I was just like, oh, you know what'd be awesome? You lost me. 5 pages in, I was already writing my own adventure. I don't know. Maybe it's a bug. Maybe it's a feature.
Yeah, and Barker actually just put the exact same comment in the chat. When reading a module, as soon as I can get inspired to do something else or go in another direction, I follow that. So yep, that's exactly the same thing for me, where it's just like, they can be great at sort of giving a spark, but I will almost never follow through with their own interpretation of that spark. I'll just take it and do what I want to do with it. And yeah, even when I have tried to run modules, the thing that almost always happens, which I talked about, I joked about in our prep deep dive, or no, it was our improv deep dive. No, it was our prep deep dive of just like, even if I read the module and decide I'm going to run it, when I get to the table, it almost never comes out right anyways. Like I'll change it in the moment accidentally. And then like the changes that I'll accidentally make like improving will like radically change the direction of the module anyway. So it just like immediately comes off the rails whether I want it to or not.
So here's what I would love to do when we have more disposable time, right? So like hopefully as the channel grows, like if there ever was a tabletop terrorist full-time gig, or if we did this, as much as possible, I think it would be really cool to, as an experiment, document both sides basically run a module, like read through it in our spare time, jump on, talk about the prep we're doing, like record that, go through, figure it all out, and then actually run it. And then do the next week and then read through, okay, this is the next section of the module, and literally talk through, all right, the players did this, so I can't do this, and then, okay, and then go and document that. Even if you do like one section of the module, that would be so fascinating to me. And the goal is you stick to it. You only change what they change. So you don't deviate. It's you're a director and you're shooting a script. You're not. It would just be an interesting thought exercise. That would be really cool. I'd love to do that in 2020 sometime. I figure out exactly like who would run it for. I feel like I would need you or James to be in on the prep, but also be players so that I could know for sure, like, I don't know. That would be a cool thought.
Definitely
exercise.
something to look at for sure.
I think that's the end.
Yeah.
I think
Unless
we
there's
did
any
it. We did
last things that we didn't see in the chat that came up since then, but I haven't. I've been kind of moderately keeping track, at least since James left, and I haven't seen any big final questions roll in. So yeah, I think we might have covered it.
Yeah, I think the final thing that, well, at least probably the largest thing that cropped up as after James left was people asking for the videos in audio format, which isn't that difficult to do. So it's basically taking what we already have and exporting them as MP3s and then uploading them to Podbean, which is a free service, unless you reach a certain cap or whatever. So maybe talking about doing that because people are asking for it. At least a handful of people in the chat are like, yeah, it would be way easier. I have a commute. I'd rather listen. So that's worth considering because it would just be an export and a copy paste of like the thumbnail and all the stuff.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty easy to, once I have the videos edited, to just, like you say, just export a video and then export just an audio file from the same render.
Cool.
I don't think that would take much more time or effort, and then we could just put that up wherever the easiest place for it to be is.
Awesome. Well, let's look at doing that, and let's look at maybe exploring Twitch in 2020. And awesome. Yeah, people are saying they would really enjoy it. Final question. Any New Year's resolutions? It's a pretty big one. Pretty big one to end on.
I'll give a couple quick ones.
Sure.
So, we've name dropped it a couple times on this channel before. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more. I'm currently writing a setting and system called Glyph, which I intend to, at the very least, if we don't finish publishing it next year, it'll at least be started to, like, I've participated in a lot of other people's projects, and like I would love to put something out that's sort of my brainchild and my baby in terms of game design stuff. So that'll be my big gaming resolution for the next year, is to get that to a place, playtesting wise and sort of publication wise, that we can start to either look for Kickstarters or some other form of funding to like make that an actual product that I can say that I have kind of headed and put out, with a lot of help, but under kind of my name. So yeah, that's my biggest resolution for next year on the gaming side of things.
Yeah, that's killer. For me, it's not on the gaming side of things, but to continue my journey in fitness, I kind of want to lose that last 15 pounds. Like I have lost a total of now about 92 pounds, which you can see on, thank you, which you could actually see if you look at older videos of me and James. It's like there's a whole extra Tim there. But I kind of want to lose that last 15, and I've actually done pretty well during the holidays, except Christmas Eve and Christmas, which I purposefully gave myself permission to eat like 8,000 calories. Jeff, I ate so much that I felt more than remorse. It was like, oh my gosh, it was terrible. Anyway, that last 15 pounds of like, and because for me, the more fit that I am, the more my creative output is, the more that stuff just comes as second nature. So that's one thing. And then for us, it is putting out and actually getting a Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grid into people's hands. We're so close. We're at the finish line, but that last stretch of finishing it and handing it and going, hey, here you go. Check it out. And letting people experience what we've worked on for so long.
Yeah, and then I guess one more that I'll kind of add on both of our behalves is just to continue this new schedule that we've started with these videos, doing the 2 videos a week on the channel, and keeping that up for as much as we can possibly do, preferably for as long as it goes. I think it would be really cool. So yeah, definitely continuing things here as they've been going.
Yeah, totally agreed, man. And this has been great. So thank you all for tuning in. Jeff, I just have to say, I think one of the coolest things that happened in 2019 is you becoming a part of Tabletop Terrors. And it's just been an awesome experience already, and we're just getting started. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, man. So, I've never done a toast with you alone. Do you know James's line?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake. And then we usually say the last line at the end together. Ready?
All right. And may you conquer
everything
you undertake.
And that's how we roll into the new year, folks. Loud, proud,
Nailed it.
And nailed it. I also highly recommend going and checking out Barker's channel. It's going to be amazing, and it already is amazing as Be a Better Game Master, but he's got a lot of cool stuff coming in 2020. Ignite, inspire the story. Thank you for everyone in the chat, and I don't know how to end this stream. Let's give it a shot. Slancha, you thought I was going to forget. I never forget. I just did a small, lizard burp. Sorry. All right. Double tap, peace.